Cardinal News is telling the little-known stories of Virginia's role in our country's march to independence. As we head toward America's 250th anniversary, we'll examine the events, people, and places that shaped the Commonwealth and the nation. Together we can better understand the role of our ancestors beyond what's in the history books. This is Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission.
Welcome to Cardinal News 250. I'm Dutchie Jessee, and for this episode, we have two guests to talk to today about Black Loyalists from the War of Independence. Andrea Davis is director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Nova Scotia, in Canada. Andrea, welcome to Cardinal News 250. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dutchie. Nice to meet you today.
Yes, and Kelley Bruce is a board member at that center. Hello, Kelley, and welcome.
Hello, Dutchie. It's great to meet you. It's great to be here.
So Andrea and Kelley are joining us from the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. That's who they sort of represent today. Now, Andrea is in Nova Scotia, which is in Shelburne, Canada, and then Kelley is in Montreal. And there's 14 hours difference driving distance, maybe, Kelley, is that right, between y'all?
That's about right.
And then from where I'm recording at Blue Ridge PBS in Roanoke, Virginia, it's 1,235 miles or 19 hours in light traffic. So it's great that we have technology to connect us today so we can talk about this. Both of our guests today are also descendants of Black Loyalists, and we have a lot to talk about, so we'll get started. Andrea, first of all, just so everyone is clear, what is a Black Loyalist?
That is a great question, and thank you everyone for listening. And we're so happy. I'm so happy to be here and to be the executive director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. And as an eighth-generation descendant of the Black Loyalists, I'm proud to announce the fact that we've been here. And I always say this; it's one of my famous openings. Is we've been here in Nova Scotia, or in Shelburne, Burtontown, since 1783 when the British arrived, and my family and myself, we're not going anywhere. The Black Loyalists are going nowhere. So most of the Africans that were enslaved and brought to North America came from the West Indies and also from West Central Africa. But for some reason, most African Americans, including the Black Loyalists who came in 1783, can likely trace our roots back to West Africa. So that's the African component. So the Black Loyalists, as I like to say, were loyal to Britain, and they were the ones that fought with Britain during the American Revolution. They were the ones that were recruited and fought for their freedom, in hopes of freedom during the American Revolution. And then the Africans came to Nova Scotia after that, making them the Black Loyalists who were loyal to Britain at that time, and to Nova Scotia as well.
So let's talk about why they made the decision to be loyal to Britain, as you say. So what was the promise? What was in it for them?
What's in it? What was in it for them? There's hope, opportunity, pride. In case you don't know, it is estimated that there were about 12.5 million Africans that were kidnapped during the slave trade. And approximately 95% of them were taken to, as I said to you, West Indies, into Latin America. So those promises that were made by Britain after the American Revolution, if not before, were promises of enslavement. First of all, happened. There wasn't really a lot of choice when it came to fighting for the British. It was more forced upon, but with little opportunity for them to have freedom, to have land, to have provisions, to have a place to go to after being forcibly removed from Africa, a place for them to, in their minds, I'm quite sure I can imagine that they were thinking about their family, and they were thinking about an opportunity to rebuild and an opportunity to have freedom and to think and act for themselves. So that would have been what the promise would have been all about. And as you know, those promises were not kept by Britain.
Right, and we'll get into that as well. But you are yourself, as I mentioned earlier, a descendant of Black Loyalists, Andrea. So I'd like to get into, what do you know about your history here, your family history?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to tell you, I'm still learning. Every day that I get an opportunity to come into the Black Loyalist Heritage Center and work with the society and staff and the community, I'm understanding more about my own ancestry. Being born and raised in Shelburne, which was one of the original landing sites of the Black Loyalists, I was not taught a lot about the Black Loyalists and their story. My family didn't talk about it. The education institutions didn't talk about it. No one in the community talked about the Black Loyalists and the time and space that they had here in Shelburne and in Birchtown. So to me, I'm still learning, but I know that part of resistance for the Black Loyalists and how I can relate to some of my family members is the Black Loyalists, they looked to the stars, and the stars became their guidance. And so I have two names or two entries of the Book of Negroes. One of them is Jupiter and Venus Farmer, which, if you think about it, if you look to the stars, that resilience has been there for a very long time. And to have those names pop up as being an ancestor of mine makes me very proud to hear that. And also Titus Milliner, who was another Black Loyalist who also came here. Here on site, we have a little whirligig. I'm not sure if you know what that is, but when the wind blows, it kind of propels or moves the device around. We have a little boat out there, and it's got some figurines of ancestors. And the name of the boat of the ship is called the Diana. And so my ancestor, Jupiter Farmer and Venus Farmer, would have come from America on that ship, the Diana, which would have landed in Port Mattoon, which is away from Shelburne here. But the history of that and those entries from the Book of Negroes makes me extremely proud to continue to research the family and talk about it more.
Yeah. Kelley, I want to bring you in here. Kelley Bruce, you're a board member at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. You also have a history with Black Loyalists. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I do. I always hate to follow Andrea because she's so eloquent. She tells a great story, and then it's me just coming up on the end trying to build things back. But I'm glad she started. So kind of like Andrea, the oldest ancestor that we've been able to trace, his name is Joseph Hartley, and he came in 1783 on a brig Elijah. So that was about 8 generations ago. And my husband and I are very much into genealogy. So we've actually been to Virginia. We've gone down to Colonial Williamsburg to look for links there, and also to look for opportunities that we can use for the Black Loyalist Center. We also went down to Charleston to look for some of our ancestors to see where they came from as well. But very much like Andrea, that's how my ancestors landed on the shore of Birchtown in 1783. And kind of that's what my ancestry is. We have Hartleys who have now, they populated Shelburne. They've moved on to other areas, but that's my biggest link for the.
So let's talk about the Heritage Center. Opened, was it 2015? Do I have that right? How did that come about? Were you instrumental in its founding, Andrea? You're the executive director now, so I'm wondering how it came about. It's coming up on 10 years old now.
Oh yes, I was not involved. I had moved away from Shelburne after I graduated high school, and I left. And I don't like to always share this, but the reason why I left was because the color of my skin is darker, and a lot of members in the community when I was growing up through high school and beyond did not share that the same skin tone. And so I kind of made it, I guess, made me feel like inferior or maybe just out of place or whatnot, because I had noticed that there was a lot of interracial relationships that were going on, and I just happened to carry the dark skin. So for some reason, it also helped guide me later on after I left to understand. I was out of the community at the time. I believe it was back in 1989, and Kelley Bruce could probably speak to this as well, where members of the Birchtown community actually established what they used to call the Shelburne County Cultural Awareness Society, and eventually that society became the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. And as a result of that, the society was established to research and to I guess, continue to share genealogical history of the Black Loyalist descendants in the Shelburne area and Shelburne County, I would say, because it's not just Shelburne, it's the county. There's Barrington and other places as well outside of Shelburne, but the Shelburne area. And as a result of that, they formed this society, and it's been in place probably before 1989 with just a few whispers, and then a fruition, coming to front in the late 1980s. And it's been in place since then.
You're nodding, Kelley. What else can you add to that for the origins of that story?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a cool story, and Andrea's touched on it. So a lot of my relatives and Andrea's relatives felt that it was important. I don't think they visualized the center as it exists right now because it's a multi-million-dollar museum that sits there, but it began kind of as a grassroots organization sitting around a kitchen table where they were saying, this is our history, and we really need to find a way to preserve it and to share it somehow. So when they started raising money just for the initial administration building, which would have housed old ancestry records and genealogy records, et cetera, they were selling hot dogs at fairs and asking our local grocery store Sobeys to, provide the hot dogs, hamburger rolls, whatever. So they were making a little bit of money every weekend, and eventually it culminated into the first version of the center. Unfortunately, at one point in time, there was arson. Somebody from the community actually burned down what our family had set up, and it was devastating because we lost a lot of records. We lost a lot of really archived, very important documents. However, the resilience that came to us from our ancestors said, "Okay, we're not going to stop here." So they decided to go even bigger. They went out and got one of our biggest corporate sponsors, which is the Nova Scotia Power Association of Power Company of Nova Scotia, which is now called Emera, who put a lot of money forth to get us up and running. And the provincial government kicked in, the federal government kicked in. A lot of hard work, tears, blood, sweat, all of that went into putting together what now sits proudly as the Black Cultural Center. And as I said, it is a gem. It's a gem in a very small rural community.
When was the arson, and was there a prosecution of that?
Yeah. So the actual year, that's a year, that's my memory.
I have it.
Yeah.
2006 was when the arson took place, and there has never been anybody that has been prosecuted for that crime. I had an opportunity last year to go to a judiciary meeting with the judges of Nova Scotia, and I spoke briefly about this in terms of bringing it up to say that these are some of the hindrances and obstacles and trauma that we face in the Black community when a crime such as arson is committed and there's nobody brought to justice. And so I had an opportunity to speak with somebody firsthand that was at the trial, and that person gave me a bit of a background, which I didn't speak about, but it was advised that because the center did not have security systems in place, that they were unable to identify who was responsible for the fire. And so, and bring that person to prosecution. So again, the trauma is there, and we're healing from 2006. But every time we begin the healing process, the cycle continues, and we're going back into a traumatic situation. So it seems like it's just never ending with fire. We recently had fires last year, so that may be a whole other topic. But that perpetrated some of that trauma. But also, how do you heal from that? Because it was right in our backyard here at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center. And as Kelley stated, there was over 20 plus years of research that was done, that was being held in that building. And there was, it all went down with the fire. And so that rebuild took a little bit of time to 2015, but we got there through the help of community and other sponsors. And we're not going anywhere. I'd like to say that as much as I can. The history is here, the building's here, the descendants are here, the community is here. So we definitely have a lot to continue to share, regardless of the traumatic events that continue.
Andrea, what brought you back to Shelburne? You left for a time and you came back. Let's talk about that.
Sure. Well, you're actually looking at Kelley Bruce. She was one of the reasons why I came back. I was in Ontario working for, I think, part-time because I had retired in 2022 or 2021. I can't remember. And then I had this, the job description came up and I read it. from afar. I was living in Ontario, and I read it, and I applied for it, and I did. Luckily, it said in there, being a descendant of the Black Loyalist was kind of one of the top key criteria for the job, and so I said, okay, let me try this. I think I am, because not knowing that history, it makes you think a little bit. But sure enough, I did that and I applied and came back. But I also knew that at some point I was going to come back because all of my family are here. My children are in a different location, and I wanted to continue the storytelling. I wanted to continue the history. Mm-hmm. And although I had been gone for 32 years from Nova Scotia, Shelburne, I was looking through some old stuff when I moved here 2 years ago, and I found a whole bunch of articles that I had clipped out regarding the Black Loyalists. So it had still been in my heart. Mm-hmm. And I looked at them, and of course, you have to almost tear them apart. And it was about stories about what was happening here at the Black Loyalists. So I said, yep, my decision to come back home was definitely the right one. And there's another story I would like to tell you about, maybe offline sometime. It's a little more personal, but I'm here, and I'm just so glad to be back home serving the community.
Yeah, so let's talk about the center itself. What's in it, and who comes, and what do they say, when they go through the Heritage Center? Tell us about the center itself, and that's for either one of you who wants to address that.
I'll let you start, and then Stuart, I can take off of what you say, because you've spent a lot of time here. Kelley is, as a board member and as a member of the community and as a descendant, comes here every time she pops into Shelburne or into town. So that's always great to see her and her husband, John, their presence here, their commitment to coming here and coming out and still looking around, even though they've seen the interior of this and exterior of the site many times. The building is world class. It's probably about an $8 million building. And the moment you walk on the property or even drive toward the property, you get this feeling. And it's a good feeling. It's a spiritual feeling. It's a mixed feeling as well, because that the trauma existed, and that the land, it's here, and that the Black Loyalists would have been on this land. But at the same time, when you walk inside of the building, it is open to ribbons with wordings on them and passages on them. The gallery itself has a glass floor in which visitors can below read the names of some of the ancestors, as well as see some of the artifacts from 2 archaeological digs that we've done in the area. We also have a large education room. It's the Sharon Oliver Education Center. So we have an opportunity to have our library, which is instilled in there. We are one of few museums that actually hold a library, an active library, as well as have a glass floor on site. On the site, and then we have, of course, staff. When you come in, the first thing you're greeted by are staff, and the majority of them are descendants as well of the Black Loyalists, which makes me very proud to say. And we welcome you with open arms. We have a beautiful gift shop. We have offices here where staff also sit. But the outside of the building, we have an old school that was acquired back in the 1990s. And that old school is actually a provincial heritage building. So it's been deemed by the province to hold a designation to be deemed heritage, which is so important. There are very few buildings in Nova Scotia that hold that particular rank. The school was once inhabited by both Black and white students, and that's what makes it unique. It's because it was one of the only integrated schools in Nova Scotia. And so we're proud to have that on our site. We also have a replica of our pit house where the Black Loyalists would have lived for up to 10 years. And we have an old church as well. And I believe that was built in the late 1800s. And it hasn't been active for a number of years, but we still hold events, marriages, Christmas concerts, opportunities for other religious services to be held there, which is fantastic. And then as you leave there, you walk down to your right, you have the burial ground. It's the memorial burial ground. It would have likely have been where the Black Loyalists would have landed. It's full of rock, but at the same time, the ground is very sacred. And we have monuments there just outlining about the Black Loyalists and the history and the struggle. The shoreline is absolutely beautiful, but the only thing is that when the Black Loyalists were pushed back here, and we could talk about that during the race riots if you'd like to know more, It's the most unnavigable arm, so you can't get a ship or a boat close enough for the Black Loyalists to either leave or come.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable. It's just so destitute, that area there with the rocks and just how the Black Loyalists were pushed back. But one thing I will say is in the old building, which was on fire, is attached to the church. So that's been all rebuilt. One thing I must say is that coming here is very serene. It speaks to the history, it speaks to the story, and it also speaks to the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to say that museums are not places where artifacts come to die. They actually come to life. The story comes to life. The event comes to life. The special tours we have and the people that come here brings everything to life. So that's just so magical. There's just something magical about it. Although the history is dark and very deep,
Mm-hmm.
there's some kind of hope that we feel as the next generation that we know we can move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelley, tell me, what do you hear from people when they're there? Because, Andrea, you just touched on it. When you go into a museum, really the idea is learning, being exposed to things in more detail. It might be something you are slightly familiar with or not at all. And then you see this whole world that you maybe didn't know about, or you see details, like you mentioned, artifacts and replicas and the information, the glass floor. So what do you hear from people, Kelley? I wonder if you, when you pop in town, as Andrea said, and when you go visit, and it might not be full of people all the time, but what do you hear from people? What is their reaction?
Well, so the first thing I'll tell you was what is my reaction. So
Okay.
I left Shelburne in 1981, so I didn't have a whole lot of time that I was spent at the center. So I left to go to Halifax, but my hometown is Shelburne, so every time I come back now, as Andrea says, we always come in and we always, spend some time there, and we always learn something new. The biggest thing about walking into that building is, Andrea, number one, it's on the site where the actual ancestors lived. They made their living there. It was not their living. They planted. It was a hard scrabble life. They had. Their land was horrible for planting. It was a horrible time for them. They arrived in the wintertime. So when you step in, you think about this place and you think about how did they manage to survive? How did they make it through? And then you walk through the gallery and you see the names, you see the people that arrived, and you see the artifacts. And you can hear the stories and you can hear the voices, and it's visceral. So, and just knowing that our ancestors, my ancestors and Andrea's as well, were actually there. They were there. So we're walking into a place that gives me goosebumps every time I come in, because this is kind of where our family story began. So I'm speaking from my own perspective as a visitor, even though I'm extremely involved with the center itself. When I physically walk into that center, that's how I feel. And we have relatives that are now that are the senior interpretive guides, or the people behind the scenes that make that organization come to life. Andrea and I are cousins, and we go way back. For people that have been to the center, my own relatives, friends that I've sent down, they come back and say it's probably one of the most moving museums that they've ever seen, ever been in. The story, as Andrea said, is dark and deep, but it is also one of resilience. So people walk away from there thinking, this is a big part of history that we didn't learn in our local history classes. It's not well written in the history books. People come away learning something that actually happened. They walk away knowing that this part of history needs to be told, needs to be preserved, needs to be shared.
We know from what I've read from the Cardinal News 250 Project and Chloe Logan's article, about 900 Black Loyalists from Virginia escaped slavery and went to Nova Scotia. Andrea, you alluded to this earlier. They didn't, Britain did not, fulfill the promises they had made to those escaped slaves. So talk a little bit about what happened. What was the reality once they were there, and then where some of them ended up, because there was sort of an exodus.
Yeah, absolutely. In 1783, when the British, landed here in Port Roseway, which is now Shelburne, the Black Loyalists were with them. So it would have been considered likely at that time a British community, or a founding of a British community. So assimilation, or I don't like to use that word, but just the fact that the Blacks were kind of left somewhat on their own to fend for themselves. In terms of land, promises were made regarding land. And when it came to divide up the land, it wasn't always equal. It wasn't always offered to the Black Loyalists, even though they were promised. One of the biggest promises, was the land. Some Black Loyalists ended up getting land, and the majority of it would have been out here where I am sitting right now in Birchtown. But at the same time, the land, as Kelley was saying, there was no ability to cultivate the land. So they gave them the poorest of the land in terms of some of the promises that they had mentioned. And again, if we look over a contract today, we're going to read the fine print. There wasn't an opportunity for the Black Loyalists to read the fine print or to have a lawyer look over what the promises were. So they definitely were left to fend on their own and to take matters into their own hands to survive. And back in 1784, I believe it was, they landed in 1783. In 1784 was when the first race riots actually took place in Shelburne in North America. And there was 10 days of fighting in which the British were fighting the Black Loyalists and the Africans to push them back to Birchtown. The reason for that fighting was basically because of wages. Blacks were actually working at a lower wage, and that was a threat to the white loyalists in terms of money, opportunity, ability to pay for their families and to feed their families. But religion was also a big part of it. The Black Loyalists thrived on religion ever since Africa as well, and religion was a way for Blacks, especially Americans. I really love how the Americans go to church. I love how they dance. I love how they sing. I love how they come together and just, do whatever they want to do. And here in Nova Scotia, we don't really have a great sense of that feeling because it was stopped at an earlier time. And I don't think that the Black Loyalists continued to take up that religious part. And they were looking in terms of religion for the right denomination for them. I guess that's the right word for them to flock to. They went through so many different types of religion, Methodist, Hunterdonian, Catholic, but they ended up going, the majority of them, with Anglican church. Although there was a Black church in Shelburne, it was tough for them to kind of find out where they belonged because they were pushed away from every religion. But there was a Black man in Shelburne and Birchtown who used to preach to both Black and white residents. And as a result of that, that was also part of, the fighting. So for 10 days, the British took hooks and chains off of ships that were ported at the wharf and would fight the Black Loyalists and push them back here, to Birchtown. And that's where they stayed. And the majority of them stayed. And that's where they thrived, was out here, in Birchtown. And it's just sad to, to think that is what formed, our history. That sad part had to form our history, where there was a lack of promises and poverty. And although everyone was poor, the Black Loyalists would have gotten less than everyone else. And for me, I find that was strategic, based on economy, based on just failure of looking at the Black race and the Black Loyalists as being individuals and being part of a community. So it was really, really sad in terms of those. But I'd just like to let you know that Birchtown at one time was the largest free Black settlement in the world outside of Africa, with over 3,000 people here on this small piece of property here that I'm standing on. In 1792, the Black Loyalists had enough. There's a couple of writings, a few writings by John Farmer, who goes on to say that he would rather die than to continue to live on this cold, dark land, or in this cold, dark country, or this cold, dark place, which is Nova Scotia. It's sad to hear that because I was born here, and to hear that and read that that's what he had said to where I am now. I don't really want to say this, but I understand why he would have said it, and to bring that to light. But they did in 1792 in Shelburne. There was a place for them to sign up to take 15 ships back to Africa, to Sierra Leone in 1792. And so the majority of them signed up, including some people from Digby and Yarmouth as well, also signed up here in Shelburne, and they made their way to Halifax, likely by foot. It's an hour, 2 hours driving, so I can't imagine how it would have been for them to get there on foot. and how long that would have taken. So they did. They went to Halifax, and 15 ships left the port of Halifax, I believe in January, and they landed in 1792. They landed in March of 1792. Approximately 1/3 of the Black Loyalists from Shelburne actually left on those ships. As Kelley and I can see, our family stayed. And so we're here, and that's why we're still here. But when they got to Africa, they didn't have a great time there either. There was nothing set up for them. The British government, again, failed them. They promised them that there would be land there for them and that there would be opportunity there for them, and there wasn't. And so, again, another failure to the system and shock and trauma to the Black Loyalists. But the history is really, really important in terms of Sierra Leone and the amount of Nova Scotians that actually make up or had made up the population of Sierra Leone. So the majority of our relatives, besides the United States, New Jersey, and down south, are likely in Sierra Leone. So we're connected. Kelley and I know that we go all across the province of Nova Scotia into the United States, down south, and into Africa. And that's something that needs to be traced, and it needs to be told as well.
So as we wrap up, and I feel like we could talk all day about this, and I feel like it would just be a great road trip to go, or maybe not a road trip, but a trip to go up and see the Heritage Center. But it strikes me as I'm listening here, Kelley, I'm thinking back to what Andrea was saying about the job description that brought her back, to Nova Scotia to take the job, to be executive director. And at the top of the list was some sort of connection, ancestry to Black Loyalists. And it's so evident what that does. The emotional investment and the bond is a really, it seems to me, critical piece of running it. But Andrea, talking about it, and what do you then pursue? What do you then, where are the roads you go down as you look to expand your collection and think of the programs you're offering there at the Heritage Center? It seems to me like that's a big, there's an emotional piece there. There's an emotional investment there because of your history there that you can't duplicate with just academic knowledge of it.
Absolutely. So is that a question?
It's not. Just nod in agreement and tell me what, because you obviously know that you have the connection as well, but seems like a great fit there that Andrea has ended up being the executive director at this time.
Well, so when we started our recruitment process, we threw the net far and wide, and we got some people that were interested, absolutely, and some people that were certainly credentialed and qualified. But Andrea, not only being credentialed and qualified, she was like our unicorn. Mm-hmm. And we called her our unicorn because, her family is so deeply rooted in the history of Shelburne. She had been away, so she had experienced, other parts of the world. She had worked at the government level in Ontario, which is 3 provinces away from where she is. And suddenly she feels, and she talks about it, she felt a calling to come back. Mm-hmm. And it was serendipitous. It happened exactly when we needed her to come. She was able to say, okay, I'm ready to come back to my roots. And she's the perfect fit. You hear her speak. She speaks with passion. She speaks with knowledge. She speaks with truth. And when she is asked to come out and speak in the community on a grand scale, we've had CNN come in. She's had an article published in the New York Times. People ask for her all the time. She is a fabulous, compelling, charismatic speaker and tells the story of the Black Loyalists so perfectly. And it's because of who she is. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we did a recruitment process, but I just think that it was kismet that she landed exactly when she did, and she was called home to us. She is the perfect executive director there. She has visions. She knows where she wants to take the organization. The genealogy side of that is kind of why the whole center and that grassroots organization was compelled to meet. And we are now continuing on that. The fire was a setback, but we're now positioned to pick that up and start moving forward again. We have some funding to move forward with that. So she's got that in her sights, but she's got other ideas, and our board works very, very closely with her. We have her back. We fully support everything she is because of who she is. So, it was fun from a recruitment process. It was probably it was a dream choice. Yeah. She's our unicorn, and we're keeping her. We're not letting her go anywhere. And the fact that her community, her family is there is a big help. And
So
the other thing is that she understands the community. So when she speaks about what it was like for us to grow up and not know our history, like my skin color is different than Andrea's, and it's because of, my lineage and who married who and what families came together. And Andrea's experience would have been slightly different than mine. But the Black history was never given to any of us. It wasn't given to her or to me or to the white population. So how do we grow? How do we learn from that? The Cultural Center, the Black Loyalist Heritage Center is there to promote that and to have as much influence on curriculums and to share with people who are coming from far and wide. We have cruise ships that come in that are just blown away by our little community and the big center that we have there with that history. We have people that are from Sierra Leone, and we have a board member that has done research in the Sierra Leone area. He's an academic and a lawyer. He's on our board, and we're working with him to try and connect all of that history as well. So her vision for the center is dead on, and it's grand, and it's, we've got some big goals, and under her, we'll be doing it.
You touched on what my last question was going to be, but I think you said it nicely when talking about, the fact that the history wasn't given to you or to her. And so that's the point of this, and the point of understanding the history there of Black Loyalists, where it started and where it is today. So I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us here on the Cardinal News 250 podcast. And I want to thank everyone for listening. Andrea Davis, thank you for joining us. She's the executive director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Nova Scotia, and Kelley Bruce is on the board there, and they're both descendants of Black Loyalists. Thanks to you both for joining us. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. It was really, really, it was great. Thanks for giving us that opportunity.
Thank you.
And thanks to Chloe Logan for her work writing on this topic for the Cardinal News 250 project. And always, thanks to our friends at Blue Ridge PBS for help with our podcast series. If you want to sign up for our newsletters for this series, Cardinal News 250, or you want to learn more about us, please just visit cardinalnews.org. I'm Dutchie Jessee, Cardinal News.
Thanks for listening to Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission. For more information on Cardinal News 250, including the Cardinal 250 and other newsletters, visit cardinalnews.org.